Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander Horat. Today, we're going to be having Andy Schectman on the show. He is going to be live on audio. Hello, Andy. How are you?
I'm great, Alex. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. So, I've been seeing a lot in the news recently about this Afghanistan withdrawal, and I wanted to see your thoughts on it and what you thought about it.
Well, I guess, it to me is more than anything a vivid image of just how wasteful government can be, not only in money and resources, but in human life. I mean, over the last 20 years that we've been involved in Afghanistan, or nearly, I mean, it seems like it's been at least 20 years, you've had trillions of dollars spent, misappropriated. You've had killed on both sides, and to what end? What benefit did we get in spending all of that money and killing all of these people on both sides of the line? When as soon as they leave, instead of doing it in a drawn down, slow fashion, they just pull up and leave, which arguably should have been done a long time ago, or should have never been there to begin with. Within days of happening, the vacuum of the Taliban regime taking over city after city after city happens within days. And it's as if nothing ever happened, except the people that had assisted the U.S. will now be hunted down and killed and tortured. And I guess the point I'm getting at is that what good did it do? Wouldn't it have been better just to use all of that money into rebuilding our infrastructure, use all of that money and all of those resources in terms of protecting our domestic homeland, reinforcing the border, building the infrastructure, putting that money to good use instead of really, in retrospect, did a whole lot of no good. In fact, all it probably did was ingrain the hatred of the West even more in the Muslim world and in Afghanistan. And I think it's funny. We can talk about our forefathers and how archaic, if you will, some of their ideologies were, but they're really not. I mean, guys like Thomas Jefferson said, stay out of foreign conflict, and don't meddle in anyone else's affairs but your own. And if we just would follow those types of rules, that type of ideology, the world would be a whole lot better. And maybe we'd have a more robust and thriving infrastructure here in the United States, not in such disrepair, and you wouldn't have wasted trillions of dollars and damaged thousands or tens of thousands of lives. And I think it's emblematic of, the wastefulness that this empire, this United States empire, embarks upon, where 40% of every dollar ever created in the history of this country was done so last year. The carelessness and the wastefulness is crescendoing, Alex, and I think this is kind of emblematic of it. All of the pain and all of the expense in the end didn't do one drop of good at all. And I think you can see that right now.
Yeah, I definitely can. There's really some big things going on. I agree. We've never been in Afghanistan. We saw the Russians were in there for a while, and they weren't able to take it over. We saw the British were there also before the Russians, and they weren't able to take it over. Neither was the United States. So, big question though for me though is why the United States left so suddenly, and now why do you think they just decided to go now? Do you think they have something more important for these troops to be doing, or why do you think Biden did this?
I don't know. Maybe it was because Trump wanted to do it slowly. He wanted to show the world that his approach was better than Trump's. I don't know, Alex. I mean, none of it makes sense. War doesn't make sense. Being there didn't make sense, nor did leaving the way that we did. And you know, this is the unintended consequence of, you know, look, we've been there for almost 2 decades. And we had a whole bunch of, no one's really talking about the people who helped us. What does it mean for them and their families? What about the people that, the Americans that are still there? Interracial, or that's not the right word, where Americans in Afghanistan, citizens, actually were married and had children, and there are many cases of that. What about those people? What does it say? I think it's a scary thing, Alex, and I just think it's emblematic of a country that's kind of lost its bearings, and when you look at the chaos and the destruction that ultimately it created, and the vacuum that it has left behind as we've left, I don't know. It doesn't make sense. Wasn't well thought out, and I think there'll be a lot of people hurt over it in the wake of putting out the way that we did. So they were showing some of the misallocations too, and the lavish lifestyles that some of these Afghani generals and what have you were living in, and how, you know, you have just such misallocations and distortions of aid and of capital. It makes you wonder, all of these tax dollars that we're paying, most of it, lots of it, was misappropriated, went to the wrong hands, and now as we pull out, we fully outfitted half of the Taliban with Humvees and weapons and U.S. military gear that they just picked up and left there. This was horribly mismanaged, horribly thought out from the very beginning. And there's something to be said when guys like Rand Paul talk about bring home your troops, close your borders, protect your homeland, build your infrastructure, and stop dicking around the world being the policeman of the world. It is bankrupting this country. It is creating more hatred than it is good. And the unintended consequences, I think, are stories that we really will never hear about. But I can promise you, in a world like that, where this type of battle has been going on for hundreds, if not thousands of years, it's one of these deals that we were naive and foolish to get into, and we did, and we created a big mess, and we just figured we'd pick up and leave. Not cool. It's just not cool. And I think all of the lives that were affected, the military, the families of the military, even the people in Afghanistan, the good people, not the Taliban, but the people's lives were ruined forever. And money was wasted, and this country is now so far in debt we'll never dig ourselves out. So what do I think about it? I think it's awful, and I think we haven't heard the last of it yet.
Yeah, I have to agree. And I found it pretty odd what you were saying earlier that, yeah, the Taliban did get a whole bunch of United States helicopters and other vehicles. Do you think this was planned? Do you think the United States planned on giving the Taliban these weapons? Or do you think it was just a very dumb mistake on U.S. government officials?
That's a good question. I've thought about that myself. But I mean, why would we want to give that to the Taliban? Who are they going to go after that with our military gear, after we just spent years training the Afghan army, the resistance army? No, I don't think so. I just think it's just stupidity by the U.S. government and doing things in a very haphazard manner. granted, look, I think pulling out was the right thing to do. Like I said, we should have never been there to begin with. But if you're going to, go in there and create this kind of a problem and then leave without cleaning up your mess and without giving it much of any thought, I think that's equally as wrong as going in there to begin with. The hubris of a country who can come in there and just do what the United States did. Imagine this was the other way around, and it was the Afghani army that had been here for the last 20 years. I think people need to try to put themselves in the position of the other people, and you can feel the hatred that they must have. Even those that we considered our friends, we just left them high and dry, and they folded like a cheap tent and with the Taliban. So did we really train them well? The whole thing, Alex, is emblematic of the late stages of this empire where, you have so many misallocations of capital and of resources. And, this is how empires die. And I think this is just another, just to leave billions of dollars worth of military gear there, just to pull out just like that and leave it there. Not only leaving it there from the wasteful standpoint, but letting it fall into the hands of the people whom you've been supposedly fighting for the past 2 decades. What does that say to the people who lost their lives? I don't know, Alex. It's a drag. It's a bummer, and I think that this administration is doing the world a disservice by pulling out the way that they did. We went into Afghanistan, Alex, because supposedly after we went into, we were looking for Osama bin Laden, and supposedly Afghanistan was was providing refuge to these people who were out to get the United States, we were told. We went in there and we supposedly did what we were supposed to do. The Obama administration supposedly killed Osama bin Laden. Why were we still there as long as we were? Why didn't they begin the drawdown? None of it makes sense, but to do it the way that they did, to leave all of the equipment there and to watch the forces that they supposedly trained for so long just fold, and now have the country 60 or 70% occupied by the Taliban, just like that, to have helicopters pulling American diplomats from the roof of the embassy, etc. Those kinds of things these are things we should have never seen, and I hope somehow, which I doubt will ever happen, but I hope somehow that we learn from these kinds of mistakes. The United States should not be the policeman of the world.
Yeah, I agree, and it almost seems like the United States made the Taliban's job easier by giving them all this really advanced technology. I guess the Taliban didn't even have an air force, but now they have an air force with all these different American helicopters. So I have to agree, it seems pretty odd, and just knowing how complex the military is, they have books on everything. I find it would be pretty amazing if it was actually a mistake and not planned. So I guess we'll see in further days what will happen and what the results of this will be. So how do you think this will affect the world, Andy, this Afghanistan withdrawal, and also the global economy?
Well, I don't know how it's going to affect the global economy. You could argue it makes the world more unstable. It only adds hatred to fuel to a hatred fire, if you will. I think that the economy is in trouble in and of itself, but when you add to it a rallying cry, if you will, and a a vacuum that has now been created where, supposedly this is where the attacks on 9/11 were planned. Who knows if what we're being told is true? All I can simply tell you is that the way that they have pulled out and left the Afghan people and the Afghan forces high and dry, the way that they have now given them, left them billions of dollars worth of high-tech military equipment and weaponry, only would probably, seek to destabilize the region even more. So, I don't know. I don't think it's going to affect the global economy any worse than it already is. I think there are other problems out there of greater magnitude from an economic standpoint, but this is just another problem from a geopolitical standpoint, a destabilization standpoint, and this is why I think there is a lot of wisdom to be found in listening to the messages that our forefathers gave us, and that is to stop meddling in the world's affairs.
Yeah, and it seems like, we made Afghanistan really angry because we killed a lot of innocent people there. And due to this, it seems like Afghanistan is probably going to forge some sort of alliance with China. I'm already starting to see Chinese diplomats are going to recognize the Taliban and everything. So seems like other countries may fill in that void because of the hatred against the United States, because of what they did, killing innocent people and bombing their cities, which was definitely not right. So Age of Darkness says this: the Middle East is a mess because of the United States and my country, the UK. Iran is the next problem. What do you think of that, Andy?
I think it's probably fairly likely. And I think that whether it be Israel attacking Iran or the United States being involved in it, I think the chances are fairly likely. A country that has aspirations of obtaining nuclear weapons, a visceral hatred for Israel, the writing is on the wall. I mean, this is a part of the world where there's been strife for 5,000 years, and the problem is the West thinking that they can come in and try to police this problem. All it does is waste money. This is what's called the military-industrial complex. I mean, this makes people very wealthy, or makes people wealthy, kills many people, but makes those who make the killing machines very, very, very wealthy. And I'm sure there'll be some rallying cry or false flag or whatever it may be that will drag the U.S. or its allies into some sort of conflict, whether it be Iran or somewhere else. Here again, I just wish we would heed the words of guys like Thomas Jefferson: stay the hell out of the problem. Stay the hell out of meddling in foreign affairs. And but they'll be somewhere else, whether it's Iran or the South China Sea or wherever it may be. There will be some conflict, or now it's in Somalia. There's always somewhere for the U.S. and the UK to be involved in some war, and it's bankrupting the West completely and totally. It's talk about, just to throw in a shameless plug for silver, there's 500 ounces of silver nearly in the tip of every Tomahawk cruise missile. It's wasteful in every single capacity, in human life, in dollars, in natural resources. It's just purely wasteful. So, I don't know if Iran is the next place or not, but I think it's naive to think that we will all of a sudden just stop warring. There are wars being fought. The U.S. is involved in all around the country that we don't, or all around the world rather, that we don't even hear about. How many people knew that they were bombing Syria recently? Somalia. They've been bombing Syria too, but how about Somalia? Mm-hmm. So, there's something going on all over the place, and all it does is extend the hatred of the West, bankrupt this country faster and faster and faster, destroy lives and waste resources. So it's not something I'm a fan of, Alex. I think this is one of the delineations between libertarianism and Republican and Democrat, in the respect that Republican and Democrat are the same thing, basically, with a different jacket. I mean, they have different ideologies, of course, but if you're a libertarian, you believe the government should protect us here at home, not around the world, and they should protect our infrastructure, have a police to protect us at home and protect our borders. And if we did that and we stopped meddling, it would be the best thing that we could do, because we cannot afford to continue as the largest debtors nation in the history of the world, continue to do this. I don't know if we talked about this last week or not. Did we talk about the U.S. economy's balance sheet last week?
We might have talked about it a little bit.
About what their largest asset is?
Oh, yes, we did talk about that. Yep, and that was student loan debt, I believe, right?
That's right. Well, one of the things I don't think we talked about, Alex, just to change the subject a little bit, you and I talk a lot about precious metals, and we didn't talk about why the price of gold and silver got nuked on Sunday night. And I don't know if you saw any of that.
Oh, yes, I did. Yep.
But I think it's important to let your listeners know what happened in the middle of the night. It just so happened that last Sunday night was a holiday in Japan and in, I believe, Korea. It was some sort of an Independence Day. And so Singapore and Japan. August 9th was a holiday. And so on Sunday evening, August 8th, in the middle of the night, after the UK, London metals market had closed, before it transitioned westward to New York, to the COMEX, while Asia was also offline, and in particular, two of the biggest Asian hubs, Singapore and Japan, on holiday and vacation. You're talking about as thinly traded of a session as could possibly be. And in that environment, some entity dumped $4 billion of notional gold contracts, 24,000 gold contracts at 100 ounces apiece, were dumped onto the market, which was a completely price indiscriminate move, where the intention was to nuke the entire market, drive the price down. But you see, what had happened was the price of gold was hovering right at the 200-day moving average. And so before this happened, and so they knew, the commercial banks, I believe, and it's almost like a currency intervention. You could point to the Bank of International Settlements or whoever the heck was stupid enough to do this, because you see, no one who wanted to maximize price would ever sell the way that this sale happened. You don't dump over 2 million ounces, 2.4 million ounces of gold onto the market all at once when the market's asleep, in between London closed and New York open, when half of Asia's on vacation. You're guaranteed to drive the price down. The way that you would do it would be to bleed it out over days or hours. At least days was hovering around the 200-day moving average. And they knew that if they pushed it down with a vengeance below the 200-day moving average, which in technical speak, when combined with momentum indicators, whichever side you are on the 200-day quite frequently is the delineation between bull and bear. And so if you can push the price down with vengeance below the 200-day with momentum, it triggers sell orders, non-emotional algorithmic sell orders through the black box programs that run most of the hedge funds and funds on Wall Street. So before the traders even got to their desks Monday morning, they had already been traded out of their position, because the bombing of the market in the middle of the night triggered all these sell orders. And interestingly, you could see what happened when it hit New York. The price shot up by $40 or so on gold and 50, 60, 70 cents on silver. This is short covering. These are the big commercial banks who have massive short positions, who knew that if they started the snowball running down the hill, reaching the 200-day technical analyst threshold, that it would trigger a lot of the sell orders, which it did. And when that happened, they were able to drive it down almost $100 on gold and a couple bucks on silver, and then turn around and start to cover the positions. This is a mugging or a drive-by shooting in broad day operation, and I will tell you that the volume of sales that we did and other people I talked to in my position throughout the industry would indicate that not one person sold an ounce of gold or silver. In fact, I was up till 4 a.m, 3 nights in a row, replying to emails and writing business, to the point where from 8 a.m. till 3 a.m. nonstop, don't get up to leave your desk, you're on the phone the whole time. And that's what it was, and continues to be. There are bargain hunters out there who realize that this is not real. This is not how markets behave. No rational trader would ever do what they did for profit. It's done for effect. And if you are wise to the game, you realize it is a subsidy that what you were trying to accumulate just went on sale. So for those people out there, don't get bummed out by what happened. Look at this as a gift. And I can tell you that the physical demand, both in retail side, my business, and all the way up to the institutional side, big players draining the COMEX market and other avenues, are doing just that. They're using this manipulated paper price as an opportunity to, or a subsidy and an opportunity to get longer into their position without being traded out of their market in an environment that would certainly lend itself to credence in owning precious metals. They're trying to link that rationale, to blur the reasoning people would employ to buy gold and silver. They're trying to throw you off the scent. But to me, I see an act of a desperate gold cartel who is throwing everything they have, including the kitchen sink, at the market, specifically when it should be going the other way. And to me, it represents nothing but a subsidy and a gift to increase your position at the lowest prices and premiums we've seen in 18 months. So crazy times on every level: political, geopolitical, economic, moral, social, you name it. And they say the Chinese have a curse, Alex, and it says, may you live in interesting times. These are anything but dull and complacent, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, it's definitely crazy times we're living in. The Economic Ninja says, crush it, guys, and that he tweeted out our live stream. I'd like to thank you for doing that. And also Age of Darkness said that he tweeted it out too. So we have a question from Head High as well. Does Andy anticipate a bog push for metal as digital currency comes online?
What push for metal? I'm sorry?
Does Andy anticipate a bog push for metal as digital currency comes online?
What is a bog push? I'm not even understanding what a bog push is.
Yeah, I never heard of that either. So, no, a big push, he said. He wrote.
Okay, a big push.
Yeah.
I think if people were smart, they would. I think that the digital government currencies spell the end of privacy in every aspect for every person. And I think that it certainly would lend itself to, if not backed by anything, even a greater destabilization of the currency than we have right now, because it would enable the Fed to enact modern monetary theory directly to your phone. Right now, the way the system works, Alex, money has to be lent into existence by the commercial banks. And if the banks are reluctant to lend for whatever reason, then you have a problem where velocity is not moving the way that the Fed would like. And so I think you end up with a situation where you have no privacy and a even more rapid destabilization of the currency. I mean, I guess what I would like to say is that just because it goes digital, there's no difference between that system and the system we have right now. It's still fiat. All that really happens is that now the ability to enact monetary policy is given to the Fed and taken away from the lending process that has been in place forever, where the banks lend money into existence. When people talk about quantitative easing, not to get too far off the question, but that's where the Fed buys bonds and creates money out of thin air to buy bonds. But all that really does is lower interest rates, which stabilizes the bond market and creates the wealth effect. Certainly, that's a big thing, obviously. But it doesn't create inflation until the banks who sell the bonds to the Fed take that money and lend it out into the system. And if they don't lend it out into the system, if they choose instead to give it back to the Fed, like we're seeing in the reverse repo market, where $1 trillion a night is being given back to the Fed at 5 basis points instead of lent out to the public at 5%, let's say, a massive difference in balance sheet, then you have a problem. And that's what we're seeing, where the banks are reeling in their liability. They don't perhaps like what they see coming down the road, and the reluctance of the banks to lend money to an economy that, for all intent and purposes, has been at least partially gutted, I think speaks volumes. And the Fed doesn't like that. When the Fed does quantitative easing, they're not only trying to maintain the wealth effect and keep interest rates low, they would also like to see inflation pick up, making this ever-increasing debt burden we have easier to pay off. And, heck, we're already seeing a whole lot of inflation, even with the bank's reluctance to lend. If we go full modern monetary theory, and the Fed is allowed to enact their policy directly to the public through their phones, in essence, or a credit card that people would have who didn't have phones, you would see a massive inflationary wave and the abolishment of any and all privacy. So I think that people should own precious metals. That's one reason, certainly. And I think it would be a big push. I think it would wake a lot of people up real quick that their life is changing forever. And, when you talk about being in the system or in the matrix, Alex, there are very few things that allow you an escape from that matrix. And precious metals might be one of the only things that will. And so I think, I would expect there to be a push. And let's remember that there's such a very small percentage of people in this country who own any precious metals, and really globally, that it doesn't take much of an influx of new capital to really destabilize the precious metals industry and render it void of any and all product. And I'm saying for at least a year now that it's my ultimate opinion that, before the music stops, there'll be a lot of people left looking for chairs, because I think this market will be defined by the inability to easily source product. And I say that to you because I've seen it repetitively over the years in environments that paled in comparison to the demand we're seeing right now. A demand that is so far detached from the price that has everyone missing the boat here. And, all I can tell you is that I've never seen demand quite like this. 2020 and 2021, for most people, have a different meaning than they do to me. I worked, for the most part, for the last 18 months, pretty much between 15 and 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. And according to Rick Rule, that's only 0.5% of exposure to precious metals to the entire financial matrix, from the Harvard Endowment Fund down to Joe Sixpack. In other words, he's saying that every portfolio across the United States, if precious metals were to represent a percentage, cumulatively, it's less than 0.5% across the board. Well, what happens if it goes back to the way it was in 1980? Alex, in 1980, we had $800 gold and $800 on the Dow Jones. Last time we saw a 1-to-1 cross. Back then, there was an 8% allocation to precious metals. Right now, there is 0.5%. The average has been 2.5% over the last 40 years, the mean. If we just regress to the mean, where someone with $100,000 has an ounce and a half of gold, $2,500 worth, or 100 ounces of silver, that would be a 5-fold increase in the amount of demand. There would be nothing left within hours. And I'm not trying to sensationalize this. It will happen. I've seen it happen over the years, many years, where the mints run out of product, usually in October, November. But in 2020, was it 2020? I lose track. Everything blurs. It was I think it was this year, 2021. 2021, the U.S. Mint started to ration both gold and silver 2 weeks into the new year. Never seen anything remotely close to that. And so, I guess all I'm trying to say to you, Alex, is that, yes, I do think a greater realization that cash is being taken out of the system. If we cross that Rubicon, if that doesn't jolt the public and them run to precious metals instead of tiptoe, I don't know what would. And quite frankly, I think anyone who would wait that long is making a big mistake. I think you have to build a core position right now, no matter what you believe in precious metals to be part of a portfolio. Everyone should have a little bit in times of great uncertainty like this, especially currency uncertainty. So I think by the time that realization happens, within days, there'll be nothing left to get. And when I say that, let's just remember there are 6 major mints of the world: the United States, United Kingdom, South Africa, Australia, Austria, and Canada. There are a few other mints, New Zealand and China or whatever, but they amount to nothing. Mexico, they're really not sending any Libertads up to the States anymore. There's really basically nothing after that. And so a couple of refineries in Switzerland and a couple of private refineries here in the States, but amount to nothing. And when those mints run out of product, it's game over. And so when you realize that they say there's no bull market like a precious metals bull market, it's because it's predicated on concern and fear. When people start to get freaked out, no one's going to sell an ounce. They already don't. So when the new stuff disappears, it's game over.
Yeah, I think you're definitely right, because if we see dollars or other fiat cash become worthless because they're going to switch to some sort of digital currency. Well, that hard cash, is how people hold their money discreetly. If they don't want their money in a bank or wherever where people can track it and see it, they hold their cash in real life, physically. So if they get rid of that, what's going to take physical cash's place? I think it's going to be gold, like you're saying. So Head Heiswall says, awesome answer. Thanks for asking. If shortages become a problem, what will that possibly do to the price of gold and silver / metals?
There have been shortages for quite some time. Look at silver. I mean, in many respects, silver has been in short supply for the last 2 years. In terms of globally, we mine over the last 2 years, about 850 million ounces, and yet the world has been demanding over 1 billion ounces per year. You're talking about 500 million ounces shortfall of silver over the last 2 years, and this is before all of the new applications that center around a green agenda and a digital agenda. And so, there are shortages. We look at what's coming out of the ground right now. Silver is priced at 72 or 3 to 1, yet it comes out of the ground at 7 to 1. This is the greatest discrepancy, the greatest value, the greatest argument you could ever make for silver right now, period. And there are shortages. In terms of the retail stuff, yeah, it's available. But again, we're saying, even though guys like the Ninja and Wall Street Silver, Chris Marcus, Big Swear, and all these great people who are brave people who are sticking their neck out to help educate the world, even though they've created a much broader understanding, a much bigger base of people who are finally getting it, we all cumulatively are still the pimple on the elephant's rear end. And so I guess what I'm getting at is that we all know that silver is a great value and what have you, and can see the shortages and can talk about it. Two things have to happen. Number one, the price needs to be, the price control needs to be taken away from the COMEX market, the speculative price control, the manipulation of commercial banks where a half a dozen commercial banks control 50% of all of the open interest on the COMEX market. It's the most concentrated short position, really, the COMEX market's ever seen in terms of concentration, sheer percentage of concentration, where it is detached from demand. It is the tail wagging the dog. And I think we'll see that. I think that at some point, if I had to bet, we would see much more price setting be done on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. The Chinese, who are the biggest accumulators of metal in the world, aren't bitching because they're accumulating it at stupid prices, and they know that. At some point, no one will deliver at these prices. At some point, the demand will make it so that the prices go crazy. Physical demand will overwhelm the ability of the commercial banks to short the price, kind of like what we saw happen with palladium. They'll stop messing with it. The price will go crazy. And I think that, this is a very high probability. So, yes, physical demand would certainly help push the price, but more so than that, we need to see the price of commodities not set by speculators. I think that all that does is add distortions and create big problems. So ultimately, prices go much higher, but we have to see the speculators get out of the shorting of precious metals to the degree that they are, with no real economic reason for doing it. And the COMEX market was originally set up to offset risk, where a farmer has a field of wheat and has to plant that field in the spring and hopefully harvest it and sell it in the fall. Well, you can get two people meet up where the farmer meets up with the baker, and the baker through the COMEX says, I'll buy those contracts from the farmer. I'll guarantee to pay him this price at the end of the year. Now the farmer can sell his production forward and not have to worry about what the growing season does to his crop. Maybe that crop is not worth as much. Maybe it's worth more. That's a choice that he'll make or she'll make along with the baker. And both parties walk away happy, where the farmer doesn't have the risk of having to sell it. At the end of the year, he already sold it for a price that he's happy with. And the same thing with the baker, knows that he'll be able to make his bread and has secured production in the future at a price that he's happy with. That is what it's made for. Or when a company like mine buys 2,000 ounces of gold and puts it in our warehouse. I can't just sit there and hope the price goes up. What if the price falls by $100 like it did on Monday? I'd be down $200,000. I mean, I'm dead. So we hedge everything. And that means we use the COMEX. So if I have 2,000 ounces of gold in physical in my warehouse, I sell 2,000 ounces on the COMEX market. So that if the price fell by $100 like it did on Monday in my physical, it went up by the exact same amount on what I had in a short position on COMEX. That is a legitimate use of short contract. Not a naked short. It's a covered short, and it is used to offset risk, not to speculate. And when speculation turns into outright manipulation, where $4 billion worth of paper gold on the December futures contract is dumped onto the market in the middle of the night, specifically to trigger sell orders by the hedge funds, knowing where they're positioned, because they're the ones that sold the options to begin with, you get into a real big problem.
Yeah.
And that's where we are at this late stage.
Well, one thing by what you raised about the COMEX and everything, I was actually, when I was out in Tennessee, I was talking to my farmer friend. He was next door, and he was saying how the Chinese already own all the wheat and all the crops before they're even taken out of the ground. And I guess it's the same for coastal areas. They own all the fish. The Chinese do, I think, 70% or something crazy like that. And what my farmer friend was talking about was that if there was like even a little bit of a drought or something, we wouldn't even be able to feed the United States population if we had to give it all to China like they're supposed to. So what are your thoughts on that, on the Chinese owning so much of our food supply?
One of the things that I've been talking a lot about lately is what I believe the Chinese are doing in a big picture way, which kind of is a nice segue into that. The Chinese, I think, aspire to be world power. They have put pegs into place, as far as I'm concerned, that guarantee it. First, they built a system along with Russia and the other BRICS nations that mimics or mirrors our SWIFT system. The SWIFT system is what the United States uses to move money around the globe, but also to penalize people with sanctions who don't do as we are told or they are told. And they can lock them out of the SWIFT system, which means you can't move dollars, which means you can't buy oil. So that's number one. They built a system, and much of Europe is signing on to it. I think a lot of the world is sick and tired of being told what to do by a U.S. government that in many ways is very hypocritical. Number two, they built the Shanghai Gold Exchange like we talked about. And the Shanghai Gold Exchange has, I believe, ultimately will be involved in setting the worldwide price of metals, but the last few years it's delivered over 90 times more gold than the COMEX market. And the reason it's delivered over 90 times more gold than the COMEX is peg number three. So first you got the system that mirrors the SWIFT. I forgot the three-letter acronym, but whatever. And then the second one is the Shanghai Gold Exchange, which mimics our COMEX. The third is the Chinese Petro-Yuan bond, which is a bond that enables China to sidestep the dollar, the petrodollar, in settlement of energy, where that bond is used to purchase oil from the Gulf states and natural gas from Russia, and is immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And so the countries sell their energy for the Petro-Yuan bond and immediately convert it to gold on the Shanghai Exchange and take possession of it. So you're seeing a sidestepping of the U.S. dollar in settlement of oil. Peg number four is the infrastructure, both internal and external. They build ghost cities. They build 12 new airports a year. Their roads and bridges are far better repaired than ours. And we've talked at length about the Chinese Belt Road Initiative,
Yep.
which is the largest 70% of human population. And
yeah, that's